So thank you, Victoria, for hopping on the Model Breaker podcast. I'm so honored to have you here. I was just reading your website, your bio, blow me away entirely. And there are many highlights I want to get through. Things like how you started coaching, how you went from product to tech to some of the most amazing fields people have heard of nowadays, and how some of the key inflection points shaped your career. So we chatted a bit before this, and I just want to go on to one moment. Since I've heard about people talking about that program, you also mentioned the impact of it on your philosophy, but we'd love to just let you tell us, how is the Hoffman process like?
Oh man, yeah. And thank you so much for having me. This is such an honor and so exciting to be able to connect. The Hoffman Institute and that entire process, at time when I first went to the website, I was really kind of skeptical about the process and what it could do for me, because it focused, on the website, it talked a lot about family, and I feel like I have a really strong relationship with my parents. And so I was, didn't think that the program was necessarily for me.
Mm.
But I had two friends who I both really respected. One who was like, very much a creative, successful Hollywood executive type, and another friend who was like kind of, really hardcore, like tech, ops, like startup dude. And both of them, who are super different, both said that that was the best experience they had in their lives.
Wow.
And so, when you have two trusted people who have very different backgrounds, say that to you, you have to be curious, right? And
Yeah.
in the moment, I was going through kind of a really challenging place where I was trying to be an entrepreneur and I was really struggling. And, all of my deep fears from childhood, from, being an immigrant, all those things were popping up, and I didn't have the tools to manage it. And so in my desperation, I was like, okay, fine, like, let me just try this program. What could be the worst of it? And basically you're in the woods for, 7 days in Napa. And the whole process takes you through what they call, the cycle of transformation, which is like awareness, compassion, forgiveness, and new behavior. And so it really addresses any patterns that you have in your life that aren't really working for you.
Mm.
And so at the time, I thought it was just about, your relationship with your parents. It was going to be too much like therapy. But really at the core, it's saying like, okay, hey, let's do some reflection. What about the certain patterns that you have in your life, in the way you perceive things, interpret things, and react? How do those not work? And how can we, pivot into a new way of living, thinking, and behaving? And so you basically spend, I'm not going to go into details because there's so much juicy, good stuff in the program that's kind of, secret, if you will,
Yeah.
because people want to, go through and experience it themselves. But at its core, that's kind of what you take away. And they have one-on-one coaching, they have small group coaching, and they have large group coaching. And so you kind of go through each of those different dynamics throughout the week. You do a lot of meditation, journaling, bioenergetics work, and it's, you're completely disconnected from the internet, from your outside world. So it really allows you to form those new neural pathways around how you think about yourself and how you behave moving forward. And so, I can't, state enough how much that impacted me, just taking 1 week to really dedicate it to myself and to, that personal development. And I'd
Yeah.
never done that before in my life to that extent. It was a serious commitment, and it really paid off.
How has that week changed you? Like going into that week, you mentioned some of the backdrop on some entrepreneurship struggle, right? How has that 7 days provided any new ways of thinking, doing, living your life?
Yes, absolutely. I really realized that I was trapped in a vicious cycle a lot of times in the past with my work. And my work, and this is going to be probably familiar for a lot of people, but my work was deeply tied to my identity and my self-worth. And therefore, if things weren't going well at work, or if I felt like I failed at something, I would take that really personally, and I didn't cultivate self-compassion.
Mm.
Because of that, that perpetuated this vicious cycle of anxiety, not feeling good enough, then like worse performance, not being in the right headspace, right? And so I would get trapped in that vicious cycle. And similarly, I could also have an upward cycle when if I did have this success, it would really kind of, put me on a high, but it wasn't grounded, right? It wasn't grounded in
Yeah.
self-compassion and in knowing that my worth wasn't tied to my work.
Mhm.
And so it was like a super volatile, like meme stock, right? Like that was my
Right.
place of
High
like,
reward, high risk. Yeah.
exactly. And it wasn't until I came out of Hoffman that I was able to fully detach myself from outcomes, right? Of
Mhm.
like things that I did and achieved or didn't achieve. And that freedom actually allowed me to be far more effective, far more confident than I expected, right? I didn't realize that would really be the, the positive outcome of doing the work. I was just like really desperate to have something make me feel better when I was feeling really anxious.
Yeah.
But, I've been able to maintain that with, continuing the practices, doing my meditations, and just really staying connected to that sense of self-awareness and understanding about, whenever I'm feeling anxious or upset, where that's really coming from and how I can be there for myself.
It is really interesting that you were not working for someone else. You're working for yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Exactly.
even that you mentioned that it wasn't free. Can you tell us more about how that's like?
Yeah, I think, and, I always wanted to be an entrepreneur, right? Like when I went to business school, even though I worked at really large, like FAANG companies, the end goal was like, I want to build something. And I studied entrepreneurship and innovation and, mentored startups, all of that. And so when I decided to try to take the leap, I was professionally equipped with like knowledge, but I was not emotionally equipped to
Mm,
handle the ups and downs and the challenges of starting something from zero.
yeah.
Right. And so, you know, when you are also like fraught with, deep-seated fears from childhood of like survivor, trying to be a survivor and, financial stresses, like suddenly not having an income, like suddenly not having that structure, not having any sort of feedback on my contributions and capability, right? That was so difficult for me.
Hmm.
And I needed the emotional tools to like deal with all of those ups and downs of entrepreneurship and like kind of being in more of this little, chamber away from the usual feedback that you get from other people.
Yeah, and that's probably what you talk about detachment, right? Where you no longer need external validation to tell you whether something is working or not. You
Yeah.
can really focus on what is important and what is important to you after you did the retreat.
Yeah, and because that transformation like healed me in so many ways, all I wanted to do was like take that and give it to other people, right? And so
Hmm.
that's when I started writing more and started coaching and creating programs just because I was like, oh my God, this is such valuable information. Like, how did
Yeah.
I not know this before? And how can I help other people? And I was doing a lot of reflection too on like, what is kind of my set of superpowers, right? And how could I apply that in the most effective way and really be
Hmm.
honest with myself and be driven by what's authentic to me versus what was trendy at the moment or like what startups were getting funded or what had the biggest valuations, right?
Yeah.
And when that alignment clicked into place, it became so much easier for me to create without feeling, just inauthentic or not being sure of my direction because I knew like what I was doing was aligned with what I cared about and what was important to me.
And what are some of those superpowers?
Yeah. So, as I was even just in the Hoffman program itself, like people in my group would tell me, like, oh my gosh, like you're so able to create space. You're so able to be there for others. You're so great at listening. Right.
Yeah.
And in some ways, those characteristics sometimes backfired on me in corporate America when being hyper aggressive and really loud in an environment was what was seen as leadership, right?
Yeah.
And I'm much more of a listen and create space leader. And so, just hearing that from my group and, in the past from, whatever group I was in, I was always kind of like the glue. And as you know, in like product marketing, product management, you kind of bring people together. That's when I realized like, really being, going into coaching, creating space in that way was something that I was like particularly good at, more so than even some of my other more professional skill sets, right? Like product management. Like, yes, I was competent and I knew all the frameworks and I was able to like get a team going and write up a great spec or whatever. But the superpower, the genius was having that emotional capacity to sit with others and be with them and help them through whatever challenges they were dealing with.
And that's the difference between good and great, right? I think the good one is where you practice, you learn, you can do PM
Yes.
really well. The great is just you're gifted with this ability to listen, to sit with people, to create space. And that also touches upon like 2 points actually. One is a lot of people will ask me when I was interviewing folks for Model Breaker, what does the corporate America success model look like, right? And a lot of them are familiar with very loud, assertive, sometimes aggressive figures. But what you just said is a different kind of leader, a leader that listens more, that celebrates people's successes, that creates space for them to thrive. And that's actually what I wish the world has more of you,
Yeah,
of that.
absolutely.
Yeah, and the other part I want to draw a connection to is you talk about the glue, being a glue as a PM. I know how that feels as a product marketing, certainly, and launching so many amazing programs as you have. What does, and you also said like being a caretaker growing up, right? What's the connection like? Like, how is it growing up? What roles did you do in the family?
Yeah. So, my family immigrated from Taiwan. So we're also from Taipei. I was actually born in Taipei.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
wow. Oh, I have no, yeah, wow.
And my grandpa used to go to Ding Tai Fung, and and basically my parents came to America to try to give me more opportunities, right? Like the classic immigrant story. And when we came here, we had like nothing. Like my dad was a dealer at a casino. My mom was working as like a bank teller, just really trying to get by. And for immigrant children growing up in the US, when your parents aren't great at speaking English, when they don't understand the culture, as a child, you actually pick up on it a lot faster,
Yeah.
right? And so in many ways, you end up wanting to protect them and to save them and take care of them to make sure that they understand what's happening or like why people are being mean, right? Like, and so in some ways, as a child, you grow up a lot faster because of that. And so, that, and also the fact that I was an only child and my grandparents then came over to America to help take care of me. So I was an only child with 4 adults, right? And so I was
Wow.
often playing like peacemaker. I was often, just trying to cheer everyone up. And so that kind of became a part of my personality, right? And
Yeah.
the dangerous side of that is being a people pleaser, right?
Right.
But the benefit of that is really being able to bring people together to make difficult personalities or different personalities be able to gel. And so that in a way was, a skill that then I could bring into my professional setting.
That's very similar to, I mean, to my story and also to
Yeah.
the school of like codependency, right? Where we learn to be very susceptible to how people think, how they feel. And in some ways, immigrant child are often parentified because we have to be the one to ask for what our parents maybe couldn't do it so eloquently as we could. So yeah, well, a very familiar story.
Yes.
And yeah, and what did you want to do when you were a child?
When I was little, because, my parents were always very like frugal and wanted to save pennies, I never had any toys really. Like I would just have like a toy here or there that like people would bring me, but they were pretty strict on like not spending money on toys. And so I would just spend hours like drawing
Wow.
and writing. And so I would kind of go in my own head and just like create all these stories and just be at my computer writing stories and little, short stories and drawing characters and all of that. And so I really wanted to be like an author and create books when I was younger. And eventually when I went through, undergrad and everything, I was like, okay, wait, like that seems like that might be difficult to immediately go
Financially, yeah. A little bit tricky. Yeah.
Again, like that immigrant sensibility, right? That practicalness came through, and it was like,
Yeah.
okay, well, what other jobs require strong communication skills, right? And that's kind of how I got into like marketing and product.
Got
But
it.
it's still my dream to write a book at some point.
Yeah, and I think the creator spirit is still very much alive, right? In your writing, when you create program, when you coach, and when you run your own business. And I'm curious how, so I think now it's almost like you're going a full circle. You're coming back to what you love. But when you were adopting that practical side of you, doing product, doing marketing, what are some of the biggest lessons you've learned in the creative industry, in the tech industry?
Yeah, and it's so funny because this again ties back to coaching, but so much of what is appearing to be conflict or is, causing frustration between people is really all about their emotions and how they're feeling about something.
Yeah.
Right. And so bringing people together, like I was in a really challenging role at Netflix where basically I had to help the creative entertainment executives also work with the very data-driven engineers and algorithm scientists, right? And so, being able to help both sides see each other's point of view and understand and feel heard, right? And feel supported. And that was a huge part of the role. And I think that's just, something that you can't get away from. At the end of the day, even if people try to be rational, there's still a lot of emotions involved. And if you're
Yeah.
able to see those for what they are, you're better able to address them and manage them.
And another question, since you're at the center, the glue that holds the team together, people probably come to you for a lot of questions, right? What type of patterns do you see, and what interests you the most?
Yeah, I think, a lot of times people would be afraid to, question or to, vocalize some of their uncertainties about things in a larger forum, right? And so being someone that people feel comfortable going to with questions is also like a really important part, I think, of leadership in general. Is if you're able to create that trust and that safe space, then people will come to you and say like, hey, I don't agree with this strategy decision, or like, I didn't understand anything they said about the algorithm in this meeting. Can you help explain that to me, right? And those kinds of questions around like, disagreement with the strategy or uncertainty around the strategy or lack of understanding about a direction, and really tricky business decisions of like, you have to make a difficult trade-off.
Yeah.
Like those are the three types of questions I think I got the most. And, as a leader, that's, where you have to really step in and try to provide the best guidance and the best point of view possible.
Got it. And assuming that probably gave you some early signals that what you're doing now, executive coaching, is a path, right? Can you tell us more about how you go from that point A to B?
Yeah, it's so funny because, in so many ways, I feel like when you are leading a team in an organization, you are inherently coaching. Like you can't get away from that really if you're doing your job right.
Yeah.
And so the transition feels so natural. It's more just like, I think of it as like B2B versus B2C, right? Like an organization, I was kind of doing it for the organization and for the team. And now I'm kind of just doing it for anyone who is a good fit. And of course, now I lack the detailed context of a particular business problem. But what I found in coaching is that actually isn't necessary for half the time when you're dealing with someone who is like super smart, high performer. Like they just need to like have a sounding board, have someone talk through like the logic, the rationale, the strategy, and you don't need to know like all the exact specific little details of like the new product launch, right? When you're doing a conversation at that high level. And you can still be really effective. And so that's kind of where I found I really enjoy spending my time with, working with people is like at that level and really, making sure that they're keeping the big vision in sight and also implementing the practical daily habits and tactics to like have that vision come to life.
Yeah, and I think that's actually how I got into coaching as well. Like I saw a gap in both worlds. One is the very data-driven business world. The other one is very like touchy-feely, if you could call like woo type of world, right? And they don't really talk that often. And I'm like, why don't I become a bridge so I can, since I'm part of both of them very deeply, and how can I bring them together and talk? And I think you also mentioned that when you first got into the health and practice, there was some skepticism in you, right? And when you were coaching, have you ever come across any of that in your business world?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think until you've really experienced it, it's really hard to fully let go of the intellectualizing of everything and trust that doing, this kind of work that's much more mindset and emotional is actually going to get you to what you actually want, right? Because we're so used to like these linear paths and these like very intellectual, rational ways of dealing with things. And we often don't want to acknowledge how much our own emotions can hold us back, or our mindset, is actually creating certain behaviors, right? And so, yeah, there's certainly plenty of people who I've spoken with who, are looking for kind of that quick fix or that kind of more intellectual kind of, MBA type, strategy. And, I'll just tell them like, yes, we can do that, but that's not really where you're going to see the transformation. And so I
Right.
usually only work with people who are really willing to examine how they are holding themselves back and certain, you know, attitudes or behaviors that they are actually open to changing. A lot of people aren't actually open to changing and aren't
Yeah.
willing to address the challenges and the hard stuff. And, that'll get you far along, but not all the way to that deep sense of like fulfillment and self-compassion and satisfaction.
I think that's also what I have been struggling in the early phase. Because
Mm-hmm.
I was debating whether I should help people take that leap of faith, or should I just serve the
Mm-hmm.
people who are willing enough to see what blockers were stopping them already, right? So, but I think once you know what you're good at and focusing on that, like there's so many people in the world that you can help, so you don't have
Yeah,
to force anyone to do anything. And
exactly.
yeah, tell us more about an example maybe of how you combine the best of both worlds of the science and the art together.
Yes, I actually help a lot of people with this. Currently coaching someone who has a whole windfall of these really great job offers, right? And going through many interview processes. And, with an interview, that and a career change or just, thinking about what's next for me, like that is often the biggest challenge that people deal with, right? Because it feels like so much is on the line, right? Like
Yeah.
getting a new job or changing my career, like, oh my God, that's like occupying my entire, it's all I'm thinking about. And so, in those instances, that's a perfect example of like, you kind of have to pair the practical and the strategy with the emotional and the mindset because so many emotions come up during that process that can really trip you up in the interview if you let them catch you at a moment where you aren't able to express your best ideas or you get caught up in your own fears, right? And I feel like that's also a time when people are more open and willing to acknowledge like, holy crap, I totally froze up at this time, right? Like I got
Yeah.
so scared because I felt like my interviewer was giving me like the stink eye, right? And so they're more open to just acknowledging that. And so that's an example of when, I'll walk them through like, okay, where is this fear coming from? What are some different thoughts you can choose when you feel that fear? And also tactically speaking, like if you're presenting your idea, what's the best structure and way to communicate that idea? And we'll go
Hmm.
through kind of both of those two things and then bring them together. And that's when you have like the best kind of representation of yourself in that moment, right?
Yeah. And I think I saw that you give them a script, you give them the content to actually apply to their life, right? So while you're helping them unblock their mindset, the mental models, you also gave them the tools to implement and take action in their life.
Absolutely. I think that's what's beautiful about coaching, is that there's so many, it's very like action and outcome oriented too, right? It's like, how do
Yeah.
we get you to, be feeling this way, doing this thing? And so, there is exploration and discovery, but there's also the hard concrete steps of like, this is how you can succeed.
And what type of people do you love to work with the most? We talk about who you don't like to work with, but like who do you love to work with?
I think it's just people who are super open-minded, really self-aware, and really kind of obsessed with self-growth, right? Like, the clients I have, they are constantly thinking about ways they can improve, whether it's like as a manager or even, with their own finances, with their own health. Like they're very growth oriented. And so, it's fun being a coach when you have someone who's constantly looking to expand in new
Yeah.
ways, right? And it's sometimes those people can be a little lack the self-compassion part, and so bringing the self-compassion into that process of expansion is, I think, the most beautiful part of being able to achieve your dreams, when you're able to do it with self-compassion, with joy, and by taking care of yourself.
And a large extent is also what you personally been through, right? Like finding that
Oh yeah.
self-compassion for your younger
Yeah,
self. Yeah. And I think that's
absolutely.
a very common theme across high achievers where it's always go, go, go. And
Mhm.
while they're balancing whether they should like pause and reflect or they can go, go, go and keep going more, right?
Yeah.
So how do you make them stop and consider a different path?
Yeah, I think, part of it is really being honest with what is driving that go, go, go. Usually it's a fear, right? Fear of not being good enough or fear of not being able to achieve a certain outcome. But when you get to what it requires to have the outcome they're looking for, usually the behaviors and that overwork is not going to get them there, right? They're just so consumed that they're not able to think big picture. They're not well rested enough to show up and be present during meetings, right? It's all these kind of byproducts of not taking care of yourself that actually hinder performance. And so when I'm working with people who are open to seeing that, it's like pretty obvious, right? I'll just ask something basic like, how is your sleep been, right?
Yeah.
And then after some reflection, it's usually like, oh, it's been terrible. And then we like dig into, the foundations of what can help you think clearly and perform well, right? And so it's kind of just, yeah, there is, that is one of the indicators of like not taking care of yourself. And the other is really hearing when that kind of bully voice in your head comes out, right? For the longest time, my entire life, I treated myself like I was like in the army and I was this drill sergeant, like just berating myself, like, oh, like you suck, get up, like you have to so much work, you're so lazy, like all these really mean, like terrible, like voices, right?
Yeah.
And I try to help my clients hear those voices in their own head when it comes up and separate themselves from that voice. Like that voice is not me. We usually name that person, right? Whoever this voice in my head, like this is the person who's bullying me. And I say, okay, I hear where you're coming from. You're afraid. I understand that. But right now, like that's not the appropriate way to speak to me, right? That's not the
Yeah.
appropriate voice I need in my head. Right now, I need something that's encouraging and positive and optimistic. And being mean to myself is only going to make me feel worse. And so that's kind of, taking that positive route towards the goal versus that like, self, um, you know, self-harassing route, right? Where you're
Yeah.
just constantly berating
Exactly.
yourself and bullying yourself. It's like, it just creates this unnecessary stress, like as if the world wasn't mean enough and tough enough, right? Why would you be mean to yourself?
Yeah. And it's almost like you help them acknowledge the root cause that's generating the voice. And you
Exactly.
suggest a different one that perhaps is more loving, more compassionate, and something their best friends will tell them.
Yeah.
And replacing that, right? Like giving them a
Yeah,
different, reprogramming the way their minds work, their voice work. So they can
exactly.
go so far than where like that very mean critical voice will drive them to.
Exactly. Yeah. I call that like the beta cycle, like your beliefs, emotions, thoughts, and actions. And
Hmm.
really, what is that underlying root cause belief? Like, I'm not good enough. Okay. Well, that triggers a feeling of fear. And the thoughts that come from that are probably really negative. Right. And so, how
Yeah.
can we shift the foundation of that belief where, hey, I am fine just as I am, right? I am worthy. I am worthy of being loved. I'm worthy of being happy. Right. And then from there, how can we achieve your goals? And all of the subsequent steps, then your emotions, your thoughts, actions all become much more positive.
Yeah, and I think you put it so beautifully. You said you can achieve whatever you want by loving yourself and treating yourself with kindness and compassion, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's literally the how should I put like the motto to live by. They put it under their Twitter bio or something, right? That's yeah. Wow.
And that was the hardest lesson for myself to learn because I conflated the idea of working hard with being mean to myself. Because when I was mean to
Mm,
myself, yeah, I did work hard, but you don't need to be mean to yourself in order to work hard, right? And
right.
that's like a logical fallacy that we have in our heads. And my goal as a coach is to help people break that fallacy in their brain and help them retrain their brains to really operate in a more efficient, positive, fulfilling way.
Yeah, and I think I saw that somewhere. You said the neuroplasticity is what you work with, right? You help them find out where those beliefs were seated, and you help them
Yes.
create a different path, so they don't have to keep going on the path that was a little bit painful, somewhat working, but not as fulfilling as what they could be working on.
Exactly. It's like it's imagine if you like lived in the city, right? And your entire life you only went down this one path and it was stinky and there was all these like obstacles and it was just like a really crappy path. And this whole time you could have been taking this scenic route that had like a
Yeah.
beautiful the ocean and you could get to the same place. And until you realize that that scenic path exists, you're going to keep taking like this really stinky old path just because you're used to that. That's your default, right? And so my goal is to help people discover that scenic path that they can take.
I also saw that you have a travel blog
Yes.
on your website, and by the way, I love the Evergreen Lodge
Oh,
on
thank you.
Yosemite.
Oh, yay. Have you been?
haven't, but you recommended. I look it up and I booked cabin. So
Oh
somewhere
my
in
gosh,
August.
I love that. That's amazing.
Yeah. Is travel a big part of your life?
It really is. And part of it was I grew up, without any vacations and without traveling really at all, because again, my parents like immigrant mentality, like really practical. I was just like school, school, school all the time, right? And when, I went to business school and I went to Facebook, actually a huge part of my job at Facebook was to travel to different markets to really do user research and understand the cultural and, the different people of each market that we were working with.
Yeah.
And so that really got the travel bug in me. I was, in Seoul, I went to Taipei, I was in Rio, like I was really all over the place. And ever since then, it's just become, a really big part of my life. It just brings so much joy. And it's a great way, again, talking about like neural pathways, right? It breaks you out of your current routine and it gives
Yes.
you a new perspective. It's a reboot for your brain in a way that, we as humans can't really do if you're in the literal same environment all the time. It's really hard to do that. And so it's kind of like a hack to reboot your brain. It's to like literally get out of wherever habit.
Right. It's a very tangible, physical hack, right?
Totally.
Like
Yeah.
just leave
Yeah,
and take a
exactly.
different route.
There you go. Yeah, the literal new scenic route that you're taking.
If you were to go back in time to your younger self, when maybe your parents immigrated over, when you were trying to learn, trying to achieve what you would like, what would you like to tell them or advice to share?
Yeah, I think, it's really that to not be afraid and to really love yourself, right? I know that's kind of been the mantra I've been kind of hammering on this entire conversation, but there were so many years, especially, it's really hard for kids who don't feel like they fit in, right? Who are immigrants to figure out how to speak up, to figure out what to say, to figure out what their voice is, and to feel a sense of belonging. And so if I were to give that version of myself, any advice, it would really be to just embrace and love exactly who I was and not be afraid to show it. Right. And I think for many years I was like so quiet because I was scared and I wouldn't speak up in class and people just thought I was really shy. Right. And it took me like, decades to really find my voice.
Yeah.
And so, I just wish that little girl had the opportunity to speak up when she was young and free and had all these like fun ideas as a kid instead of like, being afraid and kind of hiding away from that.
And if you were to help them take a first step, a small step towards that direction, what would that be?
Oh, that's a great question. I feel like this is very much like putting my own coaching hat on for myself to my younger self, right?
Yeah, like a bit of it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, just whenever you feel that sense of fear and you want to hold back, just actually push forward and like say what's on your mind. And, there were so many times when I had something on the tip of my tongue and I was about to share an idea or say something, and then fear would hold me back. And, I would say the next time you feel that feeling in your body, just let the words spill out, right? And just practice doing that over and over again till it becomes so normal to be speaking up.
Yeah, that's literally what I think I have done to become extroverted, like quote unquote.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that the reason I ask is people often hear advice and some people are just like, oh, yeah, that's it, take it and do it, right? But other folks who we're trying to get to is they hear it, but they couldn't connect it to where they see they are today. And that's why I think the daily small step is actually a lot more powerful than the big mantra, because through that you can really take action, and through action you can create your own mantra, maybe even more empowering than what we have today, right? So yeah.
I love that. +1 times 1,000. Like that's so true. And I think that's part of why I tell my clients, like, just get 1% better every day, like just little baby steps, because that builds up that muscle, right? And that confidence to eventually get to where you want to go. You have to just practice in the most easy, bite-sized ways possible.
Yeah, love it. And I knew this is like so much resonance already. But if people like, many readers would love to reach out, learn more about your work, contact you, what will be the best way to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they can go on my website, victoria-young.com.
It's also in the bio. Yeah.
Yeah, they can book a call with me. So I'm happy to connect via a call. You can just email me to hello@victoria-young.com or find me on Twitter at victoriahyoung.com.
And DM open? Yeah.
At Victoria H. Young. Yeah.
Okay. So Victoria-Young or is there
.com. Yeah.
Okay. Victoria-young.com. Got it.
Exactly. Yeah, for the website. And then of course on Twitter, I couldn't get that exact handle. So it's Victoria H. Young on Twitter.
Got it. Yeah.
I'm not special enough to claim the username.
Get the blue check and replace that out. But yeah.
Exactly. Goal.
We'll put all the link in the bio so folks can see. Also we'll send out a newsletter that links this. This is so wonderful. And we're so honored to have you here. This is such a good conversation.
Yeah, I was so honored when you reached out. I'm so grateful to just connect with a like mind and vibrant spirit like yourself. And, all the work you're doing is just absolutely mind-blowing and incredible. And I just love everything you stand for and what you're pushing forward with. And I love, being supportive or helping in whatever way possible. So I'm so excited for you. Thank you so much for having me. And
it's my pleasure. Thank you, Victoria. And you have to know the appreciation and admiration is both ways. So I am a big fan. I saw a lot of your early work and it looks very, very good. So I can't wait to see what else you're going to do next.
Thank you.
Well, thanks.